There's a comedy in the way objects fail. Buster Keaton took objects and their function as a starting point for their demise. That is my relationship with materials and my relationship with making things.
Phyllida Barlow's precarious-looking, yet ambitious installation at Tate Britain in 2014 secured her art world reputation.
At some point, things are going to fall over. At some point, things are going to collapse, and they're going to become something else. I want to follow that trail.
For me, that was the moment where I thought, oh God, you know, she's a really, really great artist. And sorry, I hadn't thought that before.
No, that's fine.
It's over 30 years since I've been to Phyllida Barlow's house in Finsbury Park, because I used to live near here, and it's just great to be seeing her again. We were young mothers with young children together. We went to the same babysitting circle and we went to the playgroup together.
Hello.
Hello, nice to see you.
And you
and
as
how
well.
funny to be back in the neighbourhood,
Glass.
as it were.
Yes.
Gosh, this is very much as I remember it.
Really?
Yes. Well, you haven't
No.
done any drastic redecorating, have you?
No. It's still falling down and
Yeah.
a kind of potential slum, I'm afraid.
Against all odds, Phyllida Barlow achieved art world acclaim after several decades of being ignored by curators and collectors. Some of her sculptures look like an abstract theatrical set. She provokes close encounters with massive forms that threaten to topple. She ignores the rules by working on a monumental scale with the most unmonumental of materials: off-cut wood, styrofoam, chicken wire and plaster. With a team of 8 assistants, she's now up against the clock, preparing for a major exhibition in Zurich.
But I think the top isn't big enough to take the role of role of material.
She's also been chosen to represent Britain at the upcoming Olympics of the art world, the Venice Biennale. As an artist who raised 5 kids on a part-time teacher's salary, Phyllida Barlow is also a survival artist.
Joel, was there another of those over there?
But anyway, big congratulations. It's great that you're doing the Venice Biennale, and great that you're up for the Hepworth Prize, and great that you've also got something big coming up in Zurich.
There seems to be a moment where something makes it known, but in terms of the job in hand...
You feel you've been doing the same thing.
Exactly.
We're the same age, so I like to see oldies blossoming, you know, reaching peak career success.
Yes. We'll go into the studio now, which you may remember.
In the back of Phyllida's house was her original studio, which I remember as a shed. This is my first visit in over 30 years.
I had to do a lot of renovation of this studio here.
Got that slightly mouldy smell that I remember. But what I do remember, which is just really embarrassing to remember now, is that I'd known you for quite some time and knew that you were a sculptor, but never seen any of your work. Until one day, one bright day, I said, oh, do take me to your studio, expecting some sort of marble head or something that looked, to me, recognisably like sculpture. And then I realised that these piles of wood or whatever were the sculptures. I don't think I was.
I think you were.
I don't think I. Well, I probably tried to be polite, but.
Oh no, you weren't.
What did I say?
I just remember. These are drawings all done prior to beginning the Zurich works, but they were definitely the catalysts for how the work gets produced. These are the platforms that are between 3 and 5 meters high.
Does it make you sort of cynical that you've sort of been discovered as if you were nowhere in the last few years and now suddenly you're famous? Does that make you feel sour? I mean, I know that that's not the truth, but to, as it were, the average newspaper reader, or it will seem that they are hearing the name Phyllida Barlow for the first time.
I couldn't have done the attention bit in my late 20s, early 30s,
Oh, really?
like some.
You wouldn't have played the media game, you wouldn't
I
have
wouldn't have been able to.
No.
I would have been overridden by it.
But what,
in some
oppressed
way.
by it?
Yes, I think I wasn't ready for it. I don't know
Yes.
how else to explain it. I think I've needed a long, slow time
Yes,
to...
For confidence to build, is it? Or...
Not confidence, but for the work to have some kind of maturity about it. Making art was the only thing that I wanted to do from about the age of 16 and a half, after I'd had a brief flirtation with being a zoologist. So what I'm interested in getting is make those folds a bit more present.
At 16, Phyllida enrolled at Chelsea Art School. Art school politics in the 1960s were like a Cold War battleground where traditional art values fought tooth and nail against experimentation.
I went to Chelsea Art School full-time after my first term. It was the beatnik era. It was poetry and writing and working all night. For me at that time, as a 16 to 19-year-old, some incredibly inspired teachers, I had to think very hard what it was about sculpture that was so attractive to me. And it was the materials. By the time I got to the Slade, which was a much more established and fixed institution in a way, I was perplexed by authority and authoritarian judgment of good and bad and right and wrong. You just say quite honestly.
I mean, it must have been very hard with 5 children, and I don't seem to remember you having a Norland nanny or anything, did you?
No.
And having to teach, and yet you still managed to carry on working. I gather you worked at night a lot, didn't you?
Yes. When eventually I had 5 children by 1981.
Yeah.
I have to emphasize that it wasn't just me, you know, it was Fabian and me, and I think that it was a double act.
Obviously, we're delighted to have 5 children, but things needed to be managed, I suppose.
Fabian Peake is an artist, writer and poet who was also a part-time teacher for decades. His father, Mervyn Peake, was the author of Gormenghast. Fabian's artwork often incorporates language or poetry. The cutout he's working on features an excerpt from Milton's Paradise Lost.
I'm not sure how I'm going to use it yet, but it might be something that is strapped to a tree. You know, perhaps giving off sort of associations with the tree of knowledge.
Phyllida and Fabian met at Chelsea Art School in the 60s while both were students.
I knew that our lives were terribly equal. We were both serious artists, and neither of us doubted the involvement with their art of the other. We came back for the autumn term, and she'd grown her hair very long, and it was terrifically attractive, you know, and so we got to know each other soon after that. But in a way, we were lucky that our lives were very similar, really. Both artists, both managing to have part-time teaching jobs, which could keep, it wasn't brilliantly paid, but it kept the money ticking over.
We were struggling, crazily struggling to keep everything afloat. The two activities of being an artist and having children are totally, completely incompatible. Therefore, there is no method for how you survive. There's only the hope that you have. I mean, the only thing that you have is this incredible, enduring love for them. That is the one thing that offers survival.
Across more than 3 decades of teaching, art trends changed, art schools evolved, and the YBA generation emerged. A number of Phyllida's students gained recognition and acclaim.
Jealousy and competitiveness and strong emotional responses to contemporaries who are getting recognition is very complex, and you can see how painful it is to young artists, you know, and it was for myself as well.
Rachel Whiteread was a student of Phylida's and became the first woman to win a Turner Prize in 1993. Her works often take the form of ghostly casts. She was a YBA who exhibited in the pivotal Sensation Show of 1997.
Phyllida was always so completely and utterly delighted for my success, you know, and yeah, in a really special way, actually. I'm not saying she's an angel, she's been very bitchy about some other people, but you know, that's quite understandable and fine.
Embrace it. Just take it on. Take on the green-eyed monster and absorb it and get to know and enjoy the work or the people who are having that acclaim.
Do you miss teaching, actually?
No, not at all.
Good. Your work seems to me to have got bigger and bolder in the last 10 years. Is that right?
Since that time, since leaving teaching, since coming on board with Hauser and Wirth, has taken a much more intended and ambitious course.
I think that was the big shift, that there was someone there to support and facilitate what she was doing. We would be assisting her with loans for exhibitions, we would be assisting her with production for new works, and we would be maintaining her archive, and we would begin basically, we'd bring her into the gallery and begin talking about her as one of our artists, so trying to form new collections for her with collectors, with curators, with press and so on.
In contrast to a backyard shed, having a gallery means having a studio the size of an airplane hangar.
To be able to see a work as it might possibly be in the space is a very new experience. And we can have then several works all going at the same time, and that's also a new experience.
There's a lot of very sort of overt humour and playfulness in some of your early works, and the ones I particularly like are the objects for a television and objects for an ironing board and all the rest of it.
Without galleries or museums inviting her to exhibit, Phyllida creatively took matters into her own hands. She invaded the living rooms of her friends. These absurdist and playful sculptures turn a TV set, an ironing board, or an upright piano into plinths for her work.
They seem to show great confidence as a sculptor. Here is something, and great confidence in your own sense of humour.
What came out of those was my relationship with the farcical side of making sculpture.
You like those slapstick films?
Yes, yeah.
Were there any particular things that you remember or that
Yes,
were...
I think Buster Keaton's relationship with inanimate objects and how his extraordinary antics are just, again, a kind of proof of the farcical relationship we can have with inanimate things. And then, in particular, maybe Laurel and Hardy, when they're commissioned, so to speak, to rebuild somebody's house, and in the process of doing that, they actually destroy it. There is something about sculpture that isn't just about perfect craft and perfect technique. It's about mistakes.
And the battle with the object,
yes, which is absolutely my relationship with making, that it's a tussle. So there is something about the endeavour that I find comical, you know, that I would have this relationship with making something that has nowhere to go and
ends up on
is
the ironing
useless.
board.
Yes, exactly. I don't even know what's under here, actually.
Welcome to Phyllida Barlow's sculpture graveyard. Her sculptures may fall apart, but they never really die.
I don't know what's wrong with this, really.
They await reincarnation as new sculptures or are left to weather.
I'm curious about the interplay between the fancifulness of stage sets and the hardcore reality of sculpture, where the two have some kind of meeting. This is the system by which it would be hung off the gantry.
Phyllida has made several boulder-like sculptures which hang from ceilings. One was called Hanging Monument. They playfully defy monument logic. They look as though they weigh tons, but it could be styrofoam with cement makeup.
I'm changing my mind about it the whole time, and eventually next year I think we'll bring it back into the studio and work on it again.
Phyllida relates obviously very much to her own generation, you know, Gormley and Deacon and Cragg, the new British sculptors of the 1980s. Her roots in some ways, it sounds odd now, are in surrealism and the idea of sort of dissonance and bringing opposing things together.
I didn't find the Devine space intimidating at all. The determination was there.
Phyllida Barlow's show at Tate Britain's Devine Gallery in 2014 was one of the most audacious installations that prestigious gallery has ever encountered. It was a monumental shout with the most unmonumental of materials. It seemed to be having a laugh at the very idea of monumentality. Some of the works there looked as if they might collapse on top of me at any moment, but the overall impact was jaw-dropping.
The idea of making things that have 100% stability, that don't break,
Fall down.
yes, and are absolutely functional, is something that can be challenged by the way I make sculpture and the accidents that happen and the fact that in some ways I encourage those accidents. Things do fall over.
Yes.
Things do break, but I'm interested...
Do they for real? I mean, because they look as though they might, but then I thought how clever that actually they don't. But have you had sculptures fall apart?
Yes, oh yes, yes, yeah.
Adam Burge was the manager of the team that installed Phyllida's sculptures in the Duveen Gallery at Tate Britain.
The look of the work presenting itself as being precarious is not the case. Precarious it may look, but precarious it isn't. There are strict rules and regulations, so if something appears to be about to fall, it's not.
For me, the Duveen show was the moment, because it's a wonderful space, isn't it? And then you filled it so commandingly, but also without changing your style in a way. I mean, it was more Phyllida Barlow sort of falling over it, you know,
yes.
toppling over.
Yeah.
Well, for me, that was the moment where I thought, oh, God, you know, she's a really, really great artist. And sorry, I hadn't thought that before.
No, that's fine.
The Duveen show was more like a performance than a lasting sculpture. Most of its ingredients now await recycling.
These are all the units that, when they're put together vertically, formed the posts or the lintels for the Tate Duveen show. There was a family of foxes somewhere in here. I'm not quite sure where she set up home. All this is fodder for future works. These are a lot of the timbers that were used in the Duveen work are now being used for the Zurich work. The show will be on 2 floors. The lower floor consists of 3 large spaces, and I want the work to link between the 3 spaces.
I mean, do you think that there are other, as it were, Phyllida Barlows out there who are doing, you know, really good work, but not being recognised?
I think my curiosity is that I work in a visual medium, yet most artwork is invisible. It doesn't get seen
unless
during
it's exhibited.
Exactly, yes. There are many artists who do not manage to get their work seen or...
So in the end, is it all to do with grit, with being willing to keep on, keeping on, keeping on, long enough? Or do you think luck comes into it?
Oh, luck, enormously, yes, yeah.
Phyllida wasn't institutionalised in the way some of her male peers were, and that may be partly because of her gender, partly because of bringing up a family meant that she was slightly under the radar in terms of being on the scene and being present. Partly perhaps because there's always been, I think, a prejudice against teaching, that teaching has never been seen as important as making, and many of the artists who've made it have made it once they distanced themselves from teaching. Institutional neglect.
I think that if you're an artist, it's also your job to go out and interest people in it, or not necessarily to sell it, but to engage the public. I mean, I like the shouty artists, the Tracy Emin, the Damien Hirst, because actually...
Well, so do I.
Oh, do you?
Oh, yeah, no, I haven't got... I wouldn't want to be misrepresented about that. I haven't got a problem with any artist's position. I can accept the whole lot, because I think there is...
But you're saying it's not your way?
Well,
obviously.
I don't mind being a shouty artist, but it's not necessarily going to be heard, you know. And that's what interests me, you know, is that you can want to your heart's desire to be seen and attain that kind of visible recognition, but it may not happen.
The art world doesn't like to admit it, but it has sort of waves of fashion, and it must be hard for artists. Obviously you've developed, but basically you've kept on doing your thing through, as it were, failure and success or recognition. And that probably is the right way to do art, isn't it?
It's a way. I mean, you know, being a young artist now, I think is tougher than it's ever been before.
Things have come full circle at the Slade School of Art for Phyllida. She was an art student at the Slade, was a long-time teacher at the Slade, and is now a source of inspiration for some of the young students having their graduating exhibition. They will soon be confronting the challenges and uncertainties of being an artist in the real world.
Well, she came to do a talk last year, and I think that release got a lot of people talking. She talks about the sort of struggles as well as which people don't sometimes want to talk about, you know, how difficult it is to actually get the work there or to install it or to realise what's in your head. The armature is polystyrene, and I know she does that a lot too, so maybe I've stolen a trick there. Pretty much anybody who makes things, I think she becomes an easy reference.
Of course, people have this inkling that you do hear of stories that people suddenly become this overnight success. But I think with people like Phyllida, the fact that it does take a long time, there's actually almost comfort in that you can spend your time with your work and take a longer time just kind of making the art rather than worrying about sort of having a level of commercial success.
Now, I think the emphasis is on how the work is seen, where, and to whom, etc., etc. And that's a tough call. There seems to be very unforgiving about the artist who goes under the radar because they need to. We may like shouty artists, but they also need their moments of, you know, I think, rest or reflection. I don't necessarily think just because a work's hit the gallery, it's the best work. And I speak for myself as or the worst work, you know. It's uncharted territory because in the end, there is very little way of judging it in the way that will guarantee that judgment is right or wrong.
Oh, that's really kind, thanks. Well, I noticed that you've got the complete correspondence of Charles Darwin, which I have read too.
But your book should be there.
Yes, it should.
By coincidence, around the time I met Phyllida, I wrote a book called The Heyday of Natural History, which was about the Victorian obsession with natural history, and in particular, the impact of Charles Darwin.
Would you say that your great-great-grandfather, Charles Darwin, has been an influence or a presence, maybe is a better word,
a presence,
in
definitely.
your life?
And my mother was very severe about how we as children might relate to him and that we shouldn't use it as some sort of leverage for our future
Where could
ambitions.
you have done that?
I suppose maybe in any circumstance, you know, it can be a kind of showstopper, you know,
really?
and she was very keen to put an embargo on that.
Yeah. You seem to have survived a lot of challenges. Do you think being the great-great-granddaughter of Charles Darwin helps?
I do think when I read the diaries that you saw earlier, there are letters that are extremely compelling. And I suppose there's something about his descriptions of family life and how those two things can come together and fall apart.
And suit you, as it were, or feel...
Or there's an empathy there.
From very small, humble things to, you know, great national museums. Here's Phyllida, she can do it.
My ambition is to make an unnameable thing.
You've we've come a very long way from that woodshed in Finsbury Park that I first saw.
Is that on my school report?